Hey there, and welcome to Manufacturing Mavericks from TBGA. I'm John Barnes, the founder of Barnes Global Advisors and Metal Powder Works. I'm a materials engineer, a girl dad, and a key stakeholder of two golden retrievers. I'm glad you're joining us. Each episode, we shine a spotlight on the people pushing the boundaries of advanced manufacturing. We explore the edge of technology, dive into economic issues, trends, and critical ideas driving manufacturing forward. We look at each of the new tech breakthroughs, industry trends, and of course, my favorite, process economics. But we know there's more than just work, so we dig into leadership stories, life lessons, and the quirks that make this field fun. And yes, you can count on some dad jokes and puns along the way because what's a show without a little groaning? Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into it. Today, joining me is Captain Jason Deichler. He's a submariner and Admiral Gaucher's lead for advanced manufacturing for submarines. I recently met Jason in person through our work with the Submarine Industrial Base, but we met in person at the USS Pittsburgh event here in Pittsburgh. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. And I really look forward to the time we have today to discuss all the topics. I'm not sure about process economics, but the other topics I'm looking forward to talking about.
Well, you're a math major, so we'll figure it out. But I do have a nautical themed dad joke for today. Where do pirates get their hooks?
I
From
don't
second
know.
from second-hand stores.
Very good. Very good. I
Yeah,
like pirate jokes.
we can got a dad joke and a pirate joke all in one. In our discussions, you've had a different career path than I have, but we sort of have ended up sort of in a similar place, not the same place, and maybe it was meant to be. You're a Yinzer, so for the uninformed, that's a native to Pittsburgh. You're a Carnegie Mellon mathematics major. I think in our conversations, there's a strong theme of service in your lineage, from Navy vets to teachers, up to and including your children. I know you're married. Your wife must, I look forward to meeting her one day. She seems like she must be an incredible person. That's not an insult to you, by the way, that just in general having to deal with, I mean, you guys got married early too, right? You met in college, is that right?
We met right after high school, so it was right
High school.
before our senior year in 1995. It a now changed. I think it's a Rita's Italian Ice. It was Fitzy's Ice Cream Store on Green Tree Road, I want to say,
Okay.
or Cochrane Road, there at the intersection, and we met. Michelle was working there. We went to rival high schools, me Charters Valley, her Seton LaSalle, and ever since 1995, the summer, we've been inseparable. So it's about 31 years now. We've been together and we did marry in 1998, near the end of my senior year in college.
Wow, that's amazing. We just celebrated 25 years.
Oh,
We
congratulations.
got a bit of a late start. So one of the things that we talked about was that you mentioned that you majored in Navy. Maybe you can tell us a bit about, that where you came from there, the background of your family having been involved with the Navy, and of course your dad being a teacher are interesting background stories. So I know we have to talk about Top Gun, but we'll
Oh,
leave that
absolutely.
we'll leave that for later because a strong finish is always necessary.
Yes.
And the name of the podcast has Maverick in the title, so
Yeah, I love it.
that's that. So Pittsburgh and service and you kind of knew you wanted to be in the Navy pretty early. You had some pretty strong support, I would say, secondary support, kind of pushing you in that direction.
Yeah, I would say that I was raised in Pittsburgh, as you said, Carnegie, Pennsylvania, the correct pronunciation of Carnegie. And my grandfather was a firefighter, and as I became more and more aware of what he did, and he told me stories of his past, he was a World War II veteran in the Pacific area of operations. He was on board LSD 938, served in World War II. He enlisted before he was allowed, like many of the World War II vets. He was 17, grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and wanted to find out what was going on in the world and really serve his country. And as he told me these stories, he would build model airplanes with me and really taught me that exacting precision of building model airplanes. He collected stamps, I did not, but it was just great time with, I called him Pappy, and it was a great time sitting down with him and just hearing about these adventures. My father, because of some medical conditions, could never enlist or join the military, but he did join public service. He was a public educator at South Fayette and Community College of Allegheny County all his life. And as I was growing up, I think they pushed me towards these these areas where I was had an opportunity to lead, and really I took a liking to it, whether it be through sports, through academic, through clubs, through church activities. My father was always pushing me to serve. He was always pushing me to be the person that was really the positive influence on other people. So it was very natural when I got into high school and I showed some academic success and some athletic success. And my father, I had three sisters, and he worked very hard, two jobs. My mom worked, and he said to me, if you want to go to a good school, you're going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to take loans, or we're going to have to figure this out. He jokingly said, if you're able to get a full scholarship, I will buy you a car. We'll get back to that and put a pin in that one for a second. And so I started looking at the Naval Academy. I liked it there. I thought the Naval Academy was a very interesting place, but I also wanted to explore some other options of civilian universities. So my football coach worked with me, Gus Marquis at the time, and helped me find ROTC and helped me find scholarships, which opened up almost every school in the country that was really scientifically minded that had an ROTC unit. And I narrowed it down to Virginia Tech and Carnegie Mellon. And I was able to get a full scholarship to college, 4 year undergraduate degree funded by the Navy. And I showed my dad the letter and I said, Dad, I got a full scholarship. I'm looking forward to that car. And he just kind of laughed and walked away and said, Congratulations, I'm proud of you. So I still have yet to see that car. I don't think I will. And that's okay. Because I knew at that time when you said I majored in Navy, and we had discussed this before, everyone said, Hey, what are you going to major in? What are you going to do? And I kind of chuckled and said, I'm going to be a naval officer. And so it was a matter of, well, what do you like to do? My dad was a math teacher, and my math teacher in high school, Dick Schubert, was very influential in my life. Another Navy veteran, submariner, World War II. And so I said, I want to major in math and join the Navy. And my adventure began in
Mhm.
1995. And since then, I've been in the Navy coming up on, well, 20, let's see, 1999. So 27 of years of active service and 31 years since I entered the ROTC program.
Wow. That reminds me, my dad would say, I'd rather owe it to you than cheat you out of it.
That is exactly, it was funny. I think my sister ended up with the car, but she always was, as we like to say, the squeaky wheel always gets the
Mm.
most oil. And my sister was a squeaky wheel. So she ended up with a car, and I had to use my graduation money to buy a bike. It made me stronger, as my dad said. And then
Yeah,
thanks.
adversity breeds character.
That's right.
Yeah, so in our conversations, I would say I think we have kind of a similar leadership style. Now, granted, I don't really know. I don't have to tell someone to flood a torpedo tube or and tell somebody to give me exactly one ping. But you made a comment that resonated with me. That was don't meddle with the process. Access the experience you have. So how does that work a little bit? Like maybe talk us through that don't meddle with the process versus you have some experience but you're not jumping into the middle of the fray.
Yeah, I think what interests me the most and where I really took that conversation and where I think about it is service selection. So what are you going to be when you grow up in college? ROTC promises me a 4 year education and a commission in the Navy or Marine Corps. And we had to determine which service we were going to join, whether it be surface warfare, air warfare, submarines, Marine Corps, or special warfare. And I gravitated towards submarine warfare. Although I'm sure when we talk about Top Gun, I will tell you about the time I flew in an F-14 on a summer cruise and went over Mach 1 and my hair on fire. And you're going to say, why did you go to the submarine service again?
Yeah, great
And
balls
I
of
will,
fire.
that's right. And I will tell you, the submarine service, what it offered me, much like the Marine Corps, was a chance for that very small group leadership style. And so don't meddle with the process. What happens is when you graduate, you come out of college, you're the academic, the scholarly type, the schoolboy, the college boy that comes out. You go through nuclear power school, it's a lot more academic, and then you're thrown into the fray with a bunch of chief petty officers, and that's our senior non-commissioned officers, our senior enlisted, who are wildly more experienced at this job than the young ensign that's coming out that knows everything about radionuclides and can tell you every equation for reactor dynamics and core characteristics. But the chief's seen it work, and he's seen it work at sea. but we're charged by being a commissioned officer and by our position to lead these men and women. So you have to take a chance. You have to take an opportunity to step back and really see what they're doing while still being able to give the order. So don't meddle with the process. The chief understands, but where can I bring to bear what I have learned through my life, the experiences, whether it be in leadership, time management, and at the same time learn from that chief. I think some of my best mentors have been the chief petty officers where I have sat back and watched, man, how does he turn that wrench? Why does he turn that wrench that way? Why is he telling that petty officer to be in a certain position or to solder a specific way? These are things I didn't know. I wasn't in the field. And I also didn't understand some of the decisions that I'm making or the orders that I'm giving. What are the expected responses? And that chief was really able to work with me and say, hey, sir, if you say this, if you do that, this is what's
Mm.
going to happen. So let's work through that. Let's have an experience where a thought process where you give the right order for the right impact and the right effect. And so it is a challenge for a young naval officer, especially in the submarine force, Marine Corps, surface warfare, where we're leading these technically heavily experienced operators, giving them orders while still learning ourselves what they know. So it was a matter of don't mess with the process until you're ready. And then when you're ready, then you can make some changes. And that really comes in a submarine officer's life when we get qualified naval nuclear engineer and the chief gets to see the reflection of what they created. And you
Mm.
really earn their respect. That comes about 4 years into it. It's a really, when you walk back, then you can puff your chest up a little bit. You can start giving orders. They start trusting you. You're part of the team. But I truly took it as more of the chief put his arm around me and said, hey, look what we created. Look what we did. And look what happens when you really become part of that team and you listen to the experience. You can become that servant leader that I truly think is necessary to be successful in the Navy.
Well, I think there's a lot of parallels. I know we exercise a lot of, we borrow the commander's intent, which is like, I'm not telling you, I'm telling you the outcome I wish to get. You advise me on how to get there. And we even, are using that with our friends at the Navy today. We're dealing with one of the senior guys, and he was asking us a bunch of questions, and I finally just was like, hey, what do you really want to know? Like, just just tell us that, and we'll try to get you what you want. Um, and that kind of worked out. It's a little bit of, you kind of get to know people a little bit. When I was at Lockheed Martin, it was important. I had people at three different sites, and so one of my friends always called it management by walking around. So you got to kind of walk in somebody's shoes and see what's really going on. And the side story that I have about that, I was interviewing a guy to come join our group, and I was reading through his file, and his supervisor had given him a negative review. But seemed like a smart guy and all this stuff. And so I called the guy up and I said, "Hey, I'm calling about Brian, thinking about offering him a job, but your review of him is less than stellar." And he's like, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I run a research group." And he's like, "Yeah, he'd be amazing at that." I said, "Well, what's going on? Are you just trying to get rid of him? What's going on?" I'm like, "It's not my first rodeo." And
Right.
he's like, "Well, our job is in production, and I need somebody here at 6 a.m., not 6:30 or 6:15. He's got to be here at 6 a.m. And he can't get here at 6 a.m." And I said, "I don't care when he gets here." And he goes, "Perfect. That's he will enjoy the flexibility, and he'll do fine." And he did. But you kind of got to call and find out what's the story behind the story a little bit. Like, didn't have anything to do with his attitude, didn't have anything to do with his actual performance. It was, I get it. The job starts at 6 a.m. on the production line. So a little bit of the management by walking around. And you said something that was really interesting to me. So this idea of, and it kind of goes back to your choice of submarines, small unit leadership, and you kind of likened submariners, SEALs, and small businesses all being quite similar, which I thought was a unique perspective. I had thought about it, but it, very different in terms of their outcome, at least the small business. Again, we're not trying
Right?
to take out anybody or attack a beach, but maybe you can walk through that analogy a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting, John, that we go through periods of leadership school where we have to step outside of our community. So the submariners have to, oh my gosh, get together with the surface warfares and the aviators and try to speak a common language. I went through this a few times in my career, and I see that I gravitated towards Navy SEALs, and Navy SEALs gravitated towards submariners. And there was a little bit of a shared language. Sometimes we carry Navy SEALs on board, but there was what was happening, and what I really recognized was in each other, we saw that there was we have to lead and we have to command submarines and we have to operate submarines or we have to operate SEAL units disconnected from any communications. So it's distributed. We get our orders, we go do our tasks, we come back and we tell our boss what we did. We don't have immediate feedback. We don't have consistent feedback. So that really breeds reliance upon every person in the team and reliance upon their specific function, and it cuts across lines of rank. It cuts across any sort of disagreement that you may have with that person. What I used to tell my team on a submarine, especially when I commanded the USS Pittsburgh, we took the submarine under the ice. We were able to do an Arctic transit, and every day was truly about survival. And what I would tell my team is, we're all going to survive together. That's it. Every one person has a part of this. So if you're having a bad day, the crew has a bad day. There is not a single person here that is not vital to this submarine. The people that aren't vital are probably sleeping, getting prepared to be vital on the next watch, or getting prepared to wake up. And I've never served with the SEAL unit, but the stories that they talk about, very similar. You and I shared a story. You talked to me about how impressed you were on reading about the preparation of the Navy SEALs for the raid on bin Laden. And I thought a lot about that. I went back and took a look at my notes, and I thought there's just another reason why we're so very similar to the Navy SEALs. It's because we truly, truly plan. We think about every contingency, because in the moment it has to be natural. In the moment, we have to be ready to respond to really an unknown set of circumstances. The SEALs go into places and environments that we have no idea. We have never scoped out before. They probably went on bin Laden's raid, and I have no knowledge of it, but went there with some knowledge of what the compound looked like. But what happens when they go inside? Same for a submariner. There aren't many people that go to the depths we do because there's no value other than to us submariners. So every environment, you're probably one of the first people to be in that environment. And how does it react? Differently all the time. So in order to remain calm, you have to work it as a team, understand your function in the larger team, and really cut across all of those lines. Now, there is authority and there is somebody that's ultimately accountable, but that's really where I started gravitating towards them. And Marine Corps units have the same thing in infantry. When you see the infantry, you talk to them, and it's the same language we speak to our people. And this isn't to denigrate aviators or surface warfare officers or surface warriors. I mean, aviators live a very solitude life. Some have small crews, but when you talk about your jet fighters, I mean, they're going out there and doing the thing alone, right? And
Hmm.
they have a crew that prepares their plane for them, and they go out there and they fight alone. And that's a whole different style of leadership, but not the type I liked. I like to be collaborative. I like to work with the team. I like to rely on each other.
Yeah, and I think the analogy for the small business side is, especially if you've come out of like a big business, my experience was mostly with large corporations. If you lose a contract or something happens in a big company, I mean, it's inconvenient, but
Right.
in a small business, that's potentially life-threatening, for the livelihood of all the people that work there. So, there's not a lot of protection and coverage. So in a sense, it's very similar, which is like, hey, we all need to work together and over communicate, as possible. Um, so I was just over the weekend, I was dealing with one of sort of my number two, and she grew up not around a lot of social media or a lot of TV and movies, and I referred to something, and she didn't get the analogy, and I said, you're going to have to actually go and start watching some military movies because the style of communication and the analogies that we present is going to become very relevant to you. And I said, so I'm going to guess if I say, give me one ping and one ping only. Any clue? She's like, no, I have no idea. I'm like, all right, we'll create a movie list for you and you can start marching through it.
That's right. I'm happy to help. I have some lists of my favorite military movies and submarine movies, and the one you're referring to, The Hunt for Red October. That's high on the list of entertainment, and I will say accuracy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that was a good one. I read the book and then I saw the movie. And, the book's always better, but I mean, Sean Connery did that was a pretty good job.
It
Yeah,
was.
it's a pretty good cast actually. The whole thing. James Earl Jones.
I
I
loved it.
remember the captain of the destroyer or the cruiser, and he's like, God damn it.
Yeah, that's pretty much us.
Which brings us, speaking of movies, so this F-14 opportunity you had, so you actually got to fly in a Tomcat.
I, d- I did. So I was in the seat where the naval flight officer typically sits. So the goose
Goose.
seat, as they would say. I had an opportunity when you're a midshipman in ROTC or Naval Academy. Each summer, you do what's called a summer cruise. The first summer is an orientation. Second summer, you kind of learn the job of the chief, and then the third summer, you shadow a division officer or a department head, and you go with communities. You apply for these just like you would any internship. So it's very similar to a Navy internship. At that point, I'll be honest with you, I knew I was probably going to go submarines, but I knew I had an opportunity to be in an F-14. So I would say that submariners have a high level of integrity, but truth is, so let's just say when you need to get an F-14 hop, you got to play to win. So I played to win that summer and said, I absolutely, Lieutenant Custer, I intend to be a jet pilot and I will take my ASVABs as soon as I get home. And he said, great. I'll send you to Norfolk. So I was with the Black Aces, VF 41, first to strike, first to fight. They were the first Tomcat Squadron to strike a land based target. They were the first Tomcat Squadron to go air to air and fight. So
Hmm.
pretty cool, pretty legendary squadron. I got there and we were landlocked at the time. So we weren't out on an aircraft carrier. And Mike Dye was my pilot. His call sign was Doer. And we went up and
Doer or
it was like do or
Dewar?
die. So
Okay, okay.
Dewar, which at first I thought it was, do you like scotch? And he said, no, no, do or die. And I said, I got it. That's very nice. They provided me a call sign of Dirk, which isn't unusual to me. That my last name, I had been called many versions of Deichler, and in high school because I tended to play football in the mud. They called me Dirt for a while. The guys heard it, so they just started calling me Dirk. Went up, got to go. Dewar said to me, "Hey, is there anything you want to do?" And I said, "So you've seen Top Gun?" And that was I should have been a rhetorical question. He was like, "Yes, I have seen Top Gun, Jason." And I said, "Great, let's just do that whole profile. Whatever they did, let's go straight vertical. Let's see what happens." Took me vertical. I said, "Break the sound barrier." He broke the sound barrier. I said, "Can we go inverted over another?" He said, "No, no, no, that's not
No.
a thing." And I said,
Keeping up
"Okay."
international relations.
Yeah, he said, "No, I can fly underneath." We flew underneath another F-14, and we were what I would call a supersonic cheerleader. We kind of stayed up pretty high and watched some other F-14 simulate dogfighting, and it was just a really cool experience. And it was something that I will tell you, it was hard for me to walk away from that and say to be a submariner. But the mission set of a submarine always interests me. The leadership style always interests me. At that time, it was pre-laser surgery on my eyes, and naval
Mm.
flight officers are awesome. They're great people and they do a great job, but I would have preferred to fly and I couldn't at that time. So I said, okay, let's do this submarine thing. And, my dad passed my sophomore year, right at the end of my freshman year of college. And before he passed, he and I had talked, and he said, "Hey, what do you think you're going to do in the Navy?" And I said, "Dad, somebody came from a submarine and they talked to me all about all the super secret missions they did and all this cool stuff. And those Tom Clancy books, Dad, that's not too far off." And my dad was a huge fan of Tom Clancy. And so I was very happy that, I got a chance to say to my dad, I think I'm going to be a submariner. And we circled back, and after 4 years, and Mr. Schubert, that high school math teacher I talked about, he brought me back into the fold too. And when I went to him and said, I want to be an aviator, maybe a Marine, maybe, or a submariner. And he said, Jason, be a submariner. It's the best job out there. You're capable. You're not going to regret it. And here I am nearly 30 years later, still loving every day of my job here.
It's interesting as Top Gun. Like I always liked planes and helicopters, but Top Gun sort of just put gasoline on it, and so I at first I was going to be a pilot. I was going to be a naval aviator. Wasn't really probably I chose wisely not doing that. But I had a friend who he was in Navy ROTC with me, finished the whole thing. And his senior year, a similar story, he was going to be a naval aviator and failed his eye exam and joined the submarine force. And I was like, how
That's
do you
awesome.
go from flying to being stuck in a tube underwater for, with no access to sunlight? But I'm sure he figured it out. So that's pretty cool. You got to fly in that and you got to go supersonic. I've not been supersonic. I have a part. I did get to go out to Edwards Air Force Base and had a part on an F-22 and we did a flight test. There's only one pilot, so there's no room for anybody else. I wasn't going
Yeah,
to sit in
yeah.
this lab. That wasn't going to work. So
That would be uncomfortable.
that would be. So then it's interesting, so by 22, you're now in charge of 10 sailors. And then, you kind of progress to the nuclear reactor underwater. So you get a lot of responsibility kind of very quickly. So you're now that ensign who can give all the equations, but you're dealing with, I assume, mostly enlisted people at that point that
Yeah,
may have
you
more
are.
experience.
They do, and it's like you said, 22. You get there, you have a division, you qualify engineer officer of the watch, and you're truly supervising on a shiftly basis a nuclear reactor. And I'll tell you, Top Gun's awesome, and flying is awesome. But as I sat back, my first fully qualified watch, I was by myself with operators, three enlisted operators in what we call the maneuvering area, which is really just kind of the core of the power plant, the center where we were able to monitor, and then some people out in the engine room. You start to recognize, holy moly, like I am in charge of a nuclear reactor propulsion plant in a submarine that can go in depths of excess of 600 feet. And it's just me. Look to your left and look to your right. It's this 22-year-old, who was just having fun last week and, playing in a softball league. And I'm sitting here in charge of this. It's a lot of fun and it's really cool and it's a lot of responsibility. And I think people that stay in this job stay because they love it, but they love that decision making. They love that responsibility. They love that opportunity to make decisions that are impactful and that really the world's depending on you at that point, and at least you felt like that. And there's a whole group of people that depend on you, and I like that. I like having people depend on me to make the right decision.
Well, and that's a good transition to talking about advanced manufacturing.
Hmm.
That's a good decision.
It is.
There's a theme here, I think, around complex systems. I would say most advanced manufacturing is complex. It is not just cutting metal on a lathe anymore. So this complex systems, leading without meddling, serving a need, fixing a problem. I think the story goes as Admiral Gaucher came to you and said, I want results. You had seen some state of the art to you was small 3D printed plastic parts. You went out to the Naval Postgraduate School and saw some big metal parts. And so I guess the is the well, why do you think that Admiral Goucher approached you about this as opposed to anybody else?
I, I'd like to think he believed in my ability to drive a problem, regardless of what that problem may be.
See, now the
Uh,
Navy aviator would have said, "Well, I'm the best."
that's true, right? But I think it was an opportunity for him where he saw that where I serve right now. So I'm the Commodore of Submarine Squadron 2. I'm in charge of 4 submarines in the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Kittery, Maine. And Admiral Goucher, before I even took this job, toured Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, and I got to give them a lot of credit. They were leaning forward in technology such as cold spray, such as additive and advanced manufacturing, and they were really leaning into it as a matter of necessity, right? They had to fix parts, they had to create parts. So they had no other choice, and they had the authorities here in the shipyard to qualify some of those parts and processes. So Admiral Gaucher saw this and said, well, I can control the Commodore. I give him orders. At that time, it was a man by the name of Dan Reese. Dan Reese was about 2 months away from me relieving him in July of 2024. And so Dan said, over to you, Jason. So I called Admiral Goucher and said, hey, what do you need me to do? And he said, I need you to triple the number of advanced manufacturing or additively manufactured parts in the submarine force in 1 year. And I said, well, how many did we make this year? And he said, I count five, so give me 25. And I said, there's only 6 months left. And he said, yes, and you get no more money, you get no more resources, and I can't tell you how to do this. So I would like to think both it was the opportunity of Portsmouth, but Admiral Goucher's known me throughout my career. I'm not a person that's going to turn down a problem. He gave me something to really dig into, and he trusted in my ability. My wife jokingly likes to call it my charm. My father-in-law like to call it. I'm one of the, and I think we're allowed to use semi swear words on the podcast. He called me the best bullshit artist he's ever met, and so I appreciate my father-in-law for saying that. But I think it's more of just my ability to talk to people and learn, which I learned
Mm.
through all those experiences we talked about through Chiefs. And so I got out there and I met people like you. I found I would call it my paperclip. And Admiral Kearney, retired Admiral Kearney, is my Microsoft paperclip. So there's a reference not people are not going to
No.
get. So who was that AI? Who was Alexa for me through the AM world? And it was really retired Admiral Tom Kearney. He said, Jason, meet me in Danville at the Center of Excellence. I'm going to show you what we really can get at here. And so that combined with my understanding and my being raised in the submarine culture of subsafe level one, the Thresher tragedy, and really what it means to us to have that part qualification. I think I was in the right place at the right time with the
Hmm.
right style of leadership to go at this and provide people the confidence because I went right at the subsafe program, right? As soon as I saw what we were capable of, I said, let's go for the highest level of essentiality. With people like Matt Sermon in charge of the submarine industrial base right now, Matt's a good friend. We went through new school together. Let's get at subsafe. Let's do our moonshot. I think now Admiral Goucher is, as he works as Derpham Submarines in transition, he's calling it, we need our Manhattan project of AM, and let's
Hmm.
work it because it's really a necessity. It's an imperative. What started off as something to replace parts that we were having a hard time to find is now turning into designing through advanced manufacturing and really getting at what it wasn't capable of doing before, whether because of the foundries, the forges are shutting down, or we just need better, more efficient parts. So that's kind of where my journey started. And then, of course, Admiral Goucher, he called them big, hairy, audacious goals, BHAGs, which is a term coined from an author. It's not at the top of my head right now, but I'd like to give him credit. It was not Admiral Goucher, but the BHAG, he said, was now three more times the parts in the calendar year of 2025. So we got up to 75 parts we installed, unique parts, many double copies. And this year I'm expecting over 100. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to triple 75 parts because we're just getting to a point now where our supply system has to catch up
Hmm.
with how we really manufacture, distribute, order, and get these things on contract. But we're getting there. Subsafe parts are being installed right now. Level one parts are being installed. And so, yes, I think in summary, what your question was complex systems, leadership, aggressiveness, fixing problems. Why me? I think all those things came together in a perfect situation where I had the dogged attitude. The technology had progressed to a point where it's going to be safe on submarines, and we're just going to go at it and get those parts made and get them installed.
Yeah, it seems like, go and when people, this qualification path and, people talk about qualification certification and they don't really know what the difference is for one, but it always, I guess it bothers me a little bit. Like the qualification path, it is what it is.
Right.
And, and so it's a process and people let it. trip them up all the time, and it's like this big, dark, hairy forest. I'm like, no, I mean, it is and it isn't. It is if you don't really know what you're doing. It's
Right.
there's a lot of ways to do things wrong, and there's pretty much a straight and narrow path, but it isn't. It's also I'll say it probably ironically a tolerant process because if your test results reveal something interesting, there's more tests to be done. You don't have to be exactly right on day one. There's always more testing that can be done. The what I always find is a lot of people just want a checklist, and I'm like, well, this doesn't work like that. This is about intent. What is this part supposed to do? Why is it a sub-safe part? What happens to it if it doesn't work in the way that it's intended to? And it's you kind of got to go through. It's just like getting to know somebody. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, there's a drawing. What does it connect to? What does it sit next to? Uh, how does it connect to it? And even back to the point of why we're here in the first place, which is why can't you get these parts today? Well, it turns out some of these parts are really hard to cast, and the people that knew how to cast them have all retired. And then there's economic issues that it's hard for foundries to be successful making a dozen parts per year. They want to be able to make 1,000 parts per year. That doesn't, it's really inconsistent with how many submarines we make. So, there's all of these entanglements that go on. And that's part of the issue that I like is making sure that let's solve, you can solve problems, but let's solve the right one. And then,
Yes.
work on that and really not try to get too involved because there's a lot of people who know how to do what they're doing. And what I was always impressed is, we have our mutual friend Jesse Geisbert, who, ran the advanced manufacturing program. There'd be 100, 120 people on these calls, and he made sure that everybody had a voice in the calls to make sure that we're all aware of what's going on. Um, and I think Matt's. So I invoked you guys, both of you guys, actually, you and Matt's sermon at the groundbreaking last week, no, the week before, for Neighborhood 91 around this Manhattan Project. It's something that Pittsburgh knows a lot about, the Manhattan
Right.
Project, deeply involved in that. And so, really thinking about like the culture of Pittsburgh is the reason why Neighborhood 91 is going to be successful, and other cities, might want to try to copy it, but the culture at the end of the day is an essential ingredient.
Yeah, John,
So I talk.
it's funny you talk about Neighborhood 91 and I want to circle back on that, but something came to mind when we were discussing certification and qualification, and it's really risk tolerance. And there is risk and extreme conservatism. And when I have been touring and when I've been going out and really trying to get these parts and these additive parts either created, installed on the ship, there's pushback. It's a new process. I do that with air quotes, which you can't see on a podcast. I
Hmm.
recognize that, but just pretend you see a guy in uniform with air quotes. This is a new process, additive, but there are known knowns and there are unknowns, of course, and we haven't put them on submarines. But the risk is always going to lie with the operator, and so the operator that has to take it in the field, the captain that has to take the submarine to sea, and extreme conservatism leads to a couple things, which is you go to sea without a part, with a lower qualified part. You have to take a risk in some area, or you don't know and you don't understand what the part that you just took from another ship is doing. And you're
Hmm.
asking the captain to take this risk. Well, yeah, we're going to take a risk with additive, but we have no knowns and we can go out there. And it's the same argument with AI. Well, how can you trust AI? Well, AI will make mistakes, but so will humans, right? Humans are going to make mistakes. We're just more willing to accept human mistakes than we are a computer. The computer should never be wrong. Get it out of there. But when you take the advanced manufacturing and the science you know and the science you have shown me on the qualification and the creation of that product, and then you run it through numerous simulations, I think that's some of the fear out there now is we haven't had these parts on submarines for many years, so we don't know what they're going to do. Yes, I agree. We can simulate that. We can monitor it. And you hit the nail on the head when you said, what's the importance of that part? What happens if that part breaks? What happens if I don't go to sea with it? And so I think a lot of people are starting, and Admiral Gaucher really leads this, and why I love working for him, and I'm going to be working for him here soon directly, is that, hey, there is risk in extreme conservatism. So let's not ignore that. Just saying we're going to be conservative doesn't mean, or we care. We all care about the sailors, of course, but the sailors have to go to sea with that. uh, part or that submarine, and let's give them a working submarine. Now, in Neighborhood 91, you're in Matt's sermon. When Matt showed me, or Matt told me to go to Danville to see the Center of Excellence, the first time I saw it with Admiral Kearney, I said, I love this place. And I called Matt immediately and said, we need to open something up like this in Pittsburgh. We need it. Pittsburgh has the education background, they have the manufacturing background, they have the right attitude, they have the locations. They have it. So how do I do this? I don't have a lot of money. I don't know how to get investors. I'm in the Navy. I'm not even allowed to talk like this. Matt, how do we do it? And he said, call John Barnes. He's already doing it at Neighborhood 91. And that's when I started my adventure in locating you around the globe. We also have many common friends you may or may not know. Mike Goldstrom, one of them. Chris Siemens, another friend of mine. He's a good Yinzer. He runs into you at some air and space conferences and says, I just talked to this guy. He said you're going to be on a podcast. What is this, some Steeler podcast? And I said, no, that's John. We're going to talk about manufacturing. And so I think it's that connection where I sought out who you were that just it's going to be successful in Pittsburgh. We care about each other. We care about the work. Andrew Carnegie's famous quote, "My heart is in the work," and that's a Pittsburgher, right? And our
Hmm.
hearts are in the work. So Neighborhood 91 it's a can't fail proposition, just because of who is running it, where it is, and all the great people that I've already met. So I just wanted to kind of throw those two opinions out there before we got too far.
Yeah, it's interesting. I lived in Australia for a little bit, and there's a really famous movie in Australia called The Castle, and it's about basically an eminent domain problem. The city wants to take over the guy's house to build an extra runway, and so he goes to the local solicitor, and he's trying to get some help, and they get a little bit of dumb luck, and they win their case, and it goes up in front of like the Supreme Court. And so there's this small town solicitor up against now the Supreme Court, and the guys the justice says, well, plead your case, and he goes, well, it's in the Constitution, and he goes, well, could you tell me which part of the Constitution? And he's like, it's like the vibe. And so I always say to me, it's like, it's a perfect statement. It's like, it's the vibe. So with Pittsburgh, it's the vibe. It's like, we were at the Atlanta airport and like two brothers didn't even know they're going to be in the same plane, show up at the gate and they're like, hey, I'm like, yeah, it's the vibe. It's like, yeah, that's just normal. It always
That's
happens.
great.
So, coming back to like, so Matt kind of a sermon provided a little bit of the why. I mean, you had some of it, the obsolescence, the running of parts, and this is a pain that's being felt. You commented to me, submariners, they just grind. So you went to the Center of Excellence, so you saw what's possible, and so our friends at Austal maintain that facility, but I think it's fair to say that isn't going to solve the Navy's problems. That is a
No,
place to go figure out what's possible. Neighborhood 91, I would point out, is more like the plate that's the final mile for production, and so I think there's this, in manufacturing, you talk about the hidden factory a lot. And so it's a similar term here, really what you guys do, which is cannibalization. And all that does is delay the problem or cause somebody else grief. So
yes,
we're just pushing this problem, down the road until suddenly, I guess you keep stealing parts, and at some point you don't have a submarine left. If we're kind of talking out to the industrial base, like what is the point of the problem? Like, yeah, there's issues with foundries and there's workforce issues and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, this is we need parts. And I remember I went out to Puget Sound like 2 summers ago, and the ship captain out there, so I forget what the guy, the people that take care of them when they're
right.
in maintenance, and he said, I don't care. Like if you give me parts and I don't use them this time, I will use them. There are, like
That's right.
I'm not so like rich in parts that I'm not going to use these parts. And somebody, if I don't use it, the next ship supervisor will use it. Talk to the industrial based piece of like why we're going down this path, because it's akin to the additive manufacturing thing. Like it's just a solution to the problem. It's nothing more or less than that. So why is it important, and what's the problem that we're trying to solve? There's a new construction problem, but
That's
there's
right.
also a sustainment problem.
That's right, John. So I'm on the more on the sustainment side for now, and my job is Commodore. Here at Squadron 2, I have in-service submarines that are coming in for maintenance availabilities, as we call them. A long term, you're kind of putting your boat in layup for 6 months. It's winter time, and you got to get all that long term maintenance done. The shipyard commander likens a maintenance availability to fixing your car engine through your glove compartment for a submarine maintenance availability. So I always like that analogy. So that's what we do. But what we were seeing over the last, I would say, decade was parts just weren't available. And this was causing challenges on submarine availability out in the water. Blue water days, that's what we want. You cannot track an adversary submarine sitting in a dry dock. It doesn't work, right? You need to be in the water. You need to get me to the water. And so these submarines have to come in to extend to make sure that they meet their full life. Over 30 years on these Virginia class submarines and the 688 submarines, we're refueling them now, extending their life so that we can really meet the combatant commander's need to put submarines out to sea. It's insatiable. The desire to have submarines and the necessity for them out there. I love my community and I have a big ego about what we do out there. But anytime we need someone, hey, where's our closest submarine? Where's our closest carrier? Yes, but where are my submarines? We're able to clandestinely get information and conduct operations without being known and at any time. So the desire to get more submarines in the water and all the mission sets start expanding. And truly, our force commander said, well, we got to get the submarines out. So we need parts. So we steal parts, like you said, and cannibalize. And then you start breaking it down. And during COVID, during some of the downtimes in the industry, we just lost some of the experience or the industrial base to reproduce these parts. So it became a necessity. How do we figure this out? How do we get the parts we need to get these submarines back to sea? And that was my day job, and that's what drove me every day. Additive had happened to be a solution. Admiral Gaucher, I told my relief today, the question that should drive you in your figuring out where you fit in the world of advanced and additive manufacturing is, can that be made additively? That was the one question that Admiral Gaucher kept saying. Did you ask him that yet, Jason? When you would come up to a part and say, well, I need to get that part. It's got a 24-month lead time. Can it be made additively?
Hmm.
I don't know, sir. How do I even answer that question? Right. And then I had to come to people like you or scientists and material metallurgists, material scientists. Hey, what can be made additively? What can we do? Break it down into metal groups and then really go after it because the goal, get submarines, get ships back in the water, fully capable, fully certified is fast. And this is where the cold spray technology, I think I've talked to you about with advanced manufacturing. Recently, Cold Spray was able to turn what would have been a 3 month dry docking job into a 2 to 3 week import in the water job, got that submarine back out. We're shaving months off, and that really matters. In the lifetime of a ship, 6 month deployments. I think the USS Pittsburgh, my ship, commissioned in the 80s. I took it all the way to 2017, 18, 19, and 20 was decommissioned. We only got 16, 17, 18 full deployments out of her. So we can't waste time. Every deployment we miss because of these parts. And then, as you mentioned, with new construction, well, this is just the way it is, right? So we no longer have the forges. Some things require forging, some things require traditional manufacturing, but just doesn't exist anymore. And we got to get faster. We have to get the District of Columbia in the water as, the Ohio class starts to age out. And our single most important asset in the military is a ballistic missile submarine. That's not really questionable or debatable. Having the ballistic missile submarines out there, and we're doing an amazing job keeping the Ohio class alive. But the District of Columbia is coming up right behind it. So we have to solve those problems. And as we solve them, we're learning ways to be more efficient, more
Hmm.
quiet. Just get some of those things that we studied in school. You probably more in depth than I did, where we said if we could only do this with the metal, or we could only bend it this way, wow, the efficiency factor we would get out. It's happening. So we're filling a need of obsolescence, and we're creating those new construction submarines using these methods, and it's not going to stop. So we need to get submarines in the water. That's my goal.
Submarines in the water. And I think the piece, from our perspective, from an engineering perspective, and knowing the additive piece. So we created a maturity model for additive, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And we would call most of what we're doing here level two. So it's level zero is prototypes, level one is shop aids. So it's not being or tooling, but it's not that thing. The thing that's being made additively isn't the part. And then level two is sort of just like that part for part replacement. Level three is part unitization, so been done through other manufacturing technologies in the past or just consolidating parts. And level four is, you can only make this part with additives. So there's like heat exchangers and filters and stuff like that now.
Right.
But level two is the single hardest place to exist. And that's exactly what we're doing
Hmm.
because that part's been designed for a different process. There's very little what we call design opportunity because it's going to have to mate and fit inside a designed
Yes.
envelope or be welded into a space. And and so now you're asking an entirely different process to be able to make a shape that there's no real reason that it should be able to make that shape and survive. So it calls to one of my team, we call her the queen of MFAM, so modify for additive. So really it's, hey, is there a shape that we can make that will survive the printing process so that we can use the rest of the manufacturing process to get it to the final, meet the drawing effectively. So that's the thing that we keep trying to impress upon people, which is like, actually, once you get through this part, life gets easier. Level
That's right, John.
three, life is good.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting is there was this, as I grew up when I was younger, my dad would I would watch him fix a washing machine, right? He would break down the components of that washing machine and he would fix it. Whether, you'd go to the local hardware store and you'd get something. As I grew up, we started to be more consumers, more just replace. I don't need to fix that thing anymore. I'll just replace the thing. And I think our Navy, as I grew up from 2000, we got to that point too. I'm just going to replace the whole component. And now when I go in, I talk a little bit about what you're talking about, which is we don't have to replace the whole component anymore. There's parts of that component that fit in the make for additive manufacturing model where it's like we can build that, that's okay, but the internals still have to be this part. And I think as we start to expand our how we look at a part where it's just not chop and swap anymore. It's, well, what part can we use? How can I? It's the thought process amongst the sailors that also, and I trust my sailors. I think I was at a meeting last week that said we can't expect the sailor to know what part to replace. And I kind of laughed, and it harkens back to the chief knows exactly what part he needs to replace. He will tell you if it's the valve body. He will tell you if it's the operator. If he just puts his hands on it and closes his eyes and feels it vibrate for 2 minutes, he'll tell you exactly what you need to fix. There are parts out there now where chiefs have said, I just need an impeller and I'll fix that pump. And we got the impeller in a system that wasn't level one sub-safe. Got them the impeller, they're running. It's an additively made part because we can make impellers. And there it is. And so if we change our model in the way of thinking of just don't chop and swap, let's fix it at component level. But the problem with that is you have to have a supply system that's dynamic enough,
Mm.
which is challenging right now. And that's, again, these are not knocks on the supply system. This is something we never planned for. So they're having to make big transitions as well. And they're working hard. Admiral Epps is working hard at how do we look at this? And the drawings we made for the parts were not built to a point where we can identify component levels. Here's the drawing, right? And so this is where it is. So as we design that and we move in toward design for additive, now we have to start thinking, okay, let's break it apart at component levels. How do we do this so that we can save time and maybe make that part at sea on some of the big decks on submarines that may be functional enough just to fix the part for the time being to get to the next stop.
There's a term for runners, pushing through the resistance. And that's really, I would say, where we're at now. We got to push through the resistance. The interchangeability, the qualification is hard and it's challenging and it's solving problem after problem. But you push through that, and then now we move into a phase which is industrialization. And that's
Yes.
where an entirely different bit of hard work comes because now you're convincing small and medium-sized companies to make investments based on hope that there's somebody's going to buy parts from them, and that's where I get enthused because I want us to lean into more of the sustainment because it's going to take a long time for parts to matriculate through the new
Yes.
construction piece, and you can accumulate vast amounts of data, in
Yes.
and sustainment. But that's not my call. I can talk it up. We'll probably have a separate conversation about that maybe,
Oh,
but we'll
I'm
let you get
sure.
through your and get into your new job first. We talked a lot about the things that we did, the leadership piece, the challenge of making parts for submarines and qualification and really I think part of it was talking about taking risks, but the right ones.
Yes.
Um, do you have any things that we missed or final words that you want to put out there? I can already sense your wife just grimace, like, oh no, he didn't just ask him to soliloquy or something.
Oh, that's probably what Michelle. I mean, I've never been at a loss for words. I'm the master of the 5 minute discussion to a 2 second question. But as a preview to my change of command speech, and I look back on this tour at Squadron 2 and what I did with advanced manufacturing, what we did. I think that's a collective we. Somebody once said, hey, or somebody talked to me and said, what was the biggest lesson you learned at Squadron 2? And I don't know if I learned it here, but it is accumulation of lessons that a lot of my great mentors, and the one that specifically said this to me wants to remain anonymous, but they told me, hey, it's not about you, Jason. It never has been about you. Um, you tend to personalize it because someone has to be ultimately accountable for a decision. But it's about making the system better, whether it be making our country stronger, whether it making the defense industrial base stronger, the submarine industrial base stronger. All of your effort has to be leaning into that. You may walk away with an award, you may walk away with accolades. You certainly will walk away with more friends, more acquaintances like you that are really all in to make us better and to truly help our submarine force be better. So I think that was the best lesson that I truly came to fruition in this tour was it's not about you. It's about making our country, our Navy, our submarine force better. And I wrap it up in my speech and I talk, I, I, I truly, my father was my first hero. I think fathers are first heroes for most people. And he taught me a lesson when you play baseball in Pittsburgh, baseball is more prevalent than lacrosse, which is the sport my sons play. And you get to a point where people can start throwing curveballs and that make or breaks a little leaguer, right? So the little leaguer that's a champion until they move the mound back and they start throwing curveballs. And I remember that day where I saw my first curveball and I think I jumped out of the box and I said, how am I going to handle this? And my dad told me, hey, you got two choices here, kid. You can step all the way up to the front of the batter's box and you can hit it before it breaks, or you can wait. You can wait for that curveball to break and see what happens and see if you can hit it out. The choice was fairly obvious to me. Step up in the batter's box, swing on your own terms, and really hit that ball before it breaks. And that's where we are right now with advanced manufacturing in the submarine force. We can step forward in the batter's box and we can hit the ball before it breaks, or we can wait for the curve. And once we wait for the curve, we're too far behind. And we've really failed our sailors. We failed our Navy. We failed our industrial base. So step up in the box, take a swing. I guarantee you it'll be worth it.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, well, that's a great way to end it, actually.
That's a preview of my change of command speech. So I'm sure my speech comes in 3 days. I'll be able to talk to our crowd about that, and I'm sure the podcast will come somewhere after that. So for all of my many wild fans, the Jason Deichler fans out there, they'll have to listen to it twice.
Well, you never know. There could be a new one starting. There's a new Instagram groups or something out there.
I love it.
Well, Jason, I appreciate it as always. It's a good chat, and I'm sorry I'll miss your change of command ceremony, but I have my own family priorities to take advantage of with the high school graduation fast approaching,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure we will. Well, I know, I know we'll be in touch. There's many things to talk about. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you again in the black and gold this fall.
Cleared for takeoff.
You've been listening to Manufacturing Mavericks, hosted by John Barnes and powered by the Barnes Global Advisors. Take a moment and subscribe to our channel.